For 50 hours, a Ukrainian intelligence team watched a single Russian fuel train without ever letting it out of sight. Not 50 hours of one shift staring at one screen. 50 hours of handoffs, partisan spotters passing the watch to thermal imaging teams, thermal imaging teams passing it to drone operators. Each link in that chain adding one more piece to a picture of exactly how this train moved, exactly when it moved, and exactly where along its route it would be most exposed. Trains do not improvise their routes. They run on fixed rails, fixed schedules, fixed choke points, and a target that cannot deviate from its own track is, to the people patient enough to watch it long enough, one of the easiest kinds of target there is to eventually get exactly right. That patience is worth sitting with for a moment, because it is easy to skip past 50 hours as just a number and miss what it actually represents. Partisan networks operating inside occupied territory carry a level of personal risk that has nothing to do with the drones or the explosives that eventually finish an operation like this one. A spotter noting train movements from a fixed position for hours at a stretch is doing something that, if discovered, ends very differently for them than it does for an operator flying a drone from safety on the other side of the front. Every hour of that 50-hour watch depended on people willing to sit inside that risk long enough to build a picture accurate enough to act on. And none of what came afterward, the drones, the strike, the fire, would have worked without that unglamorous, dangerous groundwork happening first. The train itself was not incidental to this war the way it might look from the outside. Russia had, months earlier, mostly stopped trusting the Kerch Bridge to move fuel and heavy military cargo into Crimea, after enough strikes against that crossing made every tanker convoy over it feel like a gamble nobody in Moscow wanted to keep losing. The alternative was rail, inland routes running through occupied territory that felt, on paper, considerably safer than a bridge sitting in open water under constant threat. What that shift actually did was make Russian logistics more predictable, not less exposed. A convoy can change its route hour to hour. A rail line cannot. Every train Russia now depended on to move fuel into Crimea was, by necessity, running the same handful of corridors, at broadly similar times, along track that had not moved in decades and was not about to start now. Ukrainian intelligence had mapped those corridors as thoroughly as the trains running through them, and this particular train, loaded with fuel tankers, locomotives pulling military cargo behind them, was tracked specifically because of where its route would eventually take it. A stretch of open track with limited air defense coverage nearby, chosen not for any dramatic reason, but because it happened to be one of the few points along the entire corridor where a strike could land without immediately running into whatever radar and interceptor coverage Russia had left in the area. That coverage, it turned out, was thinner than it should have been. In the weeks before this operation, separate Ukrainian strikes had already worked through several of the radar installations that would otherwise have been watching this exact stretch of track, part of a broader campaign that had nothing directly to do with this train, but everything to do with making an operation like this one survivable once the moment came. Air defense does not work as a collection of independent systems. It works as a network, radar feeding tracking data to interceptors, interceptors depending on that data to know where to look and when to fire. Remove enough of the radar, and the interceptors left behind are not blind exactly, but they are working with a smaller, later, less reliable picture than the one the system was designed around. And a smaller picture means more gaps for something small and slow to slip through unnoticed until it is already too close to stop. The weapon chosen for the strike reflected exactly that gap. Hornet drones, small, cheap, closer in cost to a few $1,000s than to anything resembling a traditional guided munition, are not built to punch through a dense, fully intact air defense network. They are built to exploit exactly the kind of degraded, thinned-out coverage that months of prior strikes had already created along this corridor. Cheap enough that losing several of them on a single mission barely registers as a cost. Small enough that what radar coverage remains struggled to hold a consistent track on them even when it did catch a fleeting contact. When the train finally reached the position Ukrainian intelligence had spent 50 hours waiting for, the drones were already positioned and waiting. Russian electronic warfare along the route did what it had been built to do. flooding the area with jamming meant to sever the communication link between each drone and its operator. The same tactic that has broken up countless less sophisticated raids earlier in this war. Against an older generation of drone entirely dependent on a continuous signal from a human controller, that jamming would likely have worked, sending the formation drifting off course or simply falling out of the sky with no signal left to fly on. These drones did not depend entirely on that link. Onboard AI guidance took over the moment the connection degraded, holding a locked course toward the pre-identified target using data already loaded before launch, correcting for drift using its own sensors rather than waiting on instructions that were no longer reliably arriving. This is, in practical terms, the same evolution that has been quietly reshaping drone warfare across this entire front for months, moving control away from a constant human hand on the stick and toward a machine that only needs to be told what to hit before it launches, then trusted to work out the last stretch of the problem on its own. It is not a small technical detail. It fundamentally changes what jamming can actually accomplish. A jamming operator working against an older, fully remote-controlled drone only has to break one link to defeat the entire weapon. Against a drone carrying its own onboard decision-making, breaking that same link accomplishes far less, because the thing that link was supposed to control has already been told, in advance, everything it needs to finish the job without further instructions. The jamming still worked, in the narrow sense that it did sever the communication link it was built to sever. It simply stopped mattering, because severing that link no longer meant severing the drone's ability to finish the mission it had already been given. The strike, when it landed, hit exactly the target 50 hours of surveillance had been built to identify. Fuel tankers went up first, the kind of fire that does not extinguish itself quickly once diesel finds enough open air to burn freely, followed by locomotives and the military cargo riding behind them. Cargo that had been loaded specifically to reinforce Russian armored units elsewhere on the peninsula, and was never going to reach them now. What had been a functioning supply train became, within minutes, a burning wreck blocking its own section of track, and the thousands of tons of fuel it had been carrying were gone before a single tanker had reached whatever unit had been waiting on it. That alone would have been a significant operation on its own, the kind of strike that, on most nights, would be the entire story. Ukraine did not stop there. Hours later, a second strike went in against a different, arguably more consequential target: the railway bridge crossing the North Crimean Canal, a structure that carried more than just one train's worth of cargo. It carried the entire rail corridor linking the Kerch Strait crossing to the interior of the peninsula and onward toward Russian positions in southern Ukraine. The actual backbone connecting everything the first strike's target train had been just one small part of. Damage the train, and Russia loses one shipment. Damage the bridge carrying every future shipment along that line, and Russia loses the corridor itself for as long as repairs take. This strike used a different tool entirely, an FP2 drone, larger and slower than the Hornets used against the train, but capable of carrying a warhead heavy enough to do real structural damage to something as substantial as a railway bridge. Where the Hornet strike depended on speed, numbers, and the specific gap created by degraded radar coverage, the bridge strike depended on raw payload. A single large warhead delivered precisely enough to do damage that could not simply be patched over with a repair crew and a few days' work. The bridge did not collapse cleanly in one strike. The first hit tore through the railway track directly and brought down one of the spans, damage severe enough on its own to halt traffic immediately. But Russian forces moved repair equipment in quickly, treating the damage as something that could be worked around rather than something that had ended the corridor's usefulness entirely. A second strike followed, this time aimed not just at the remaining structure, but at the repair equipment itself, denying Russia the tools it needed to even begin putting the crossing back together. By the time both strikes were finished, Ukrainian Special Operations Forces were describing the bridge in terms that left little room for ambiguity. The crossing, in their own public statement, no longer existed. The immediate effect on Crimea's rail network was close to total. Passenger service across the peninsula was suspended entirely by occupation authorities within days. A visible, undeniable admission that this was not damage that could be quietly worked around. Freight service, the actual lifeline this entire operation had been built to sever, fared no better. Everything that had previously moved by rail, fuel, ammunition, spare parts, reinforcements, now had exactly one remaining option: the road network. And that road network was already under sustained, near-constant pressure from the same kind of cheap, numerous drones that had just finished off the train. Highways leading into and across Crimea had, for weeks before this operation, already been absorbing a steady campaign of Hornet drone strikes against individual trucks, an unglamorous but relentless kind of pressure that rarely produces a single dramatic headline but adds up, truck by burned-out truck, into a transportation network that every driver crossing it now has to treat as genuinely dangerous rather than merely inconvenient. With rail no longer an option at all, that already pressured road network became the only path left for everything Russia still needed to move into and across the peninsula, concentrating traffic onto exactly the routes Ukrainian drones had already been hunting for weeks. The consequences reached well past anything happening on a battlefield. Fuel shortages that had already been building across Crimea, worsened by earlier strikes against the peninsula's main storage facilities, deepened further with rail no longer able to backstop what road transport alone could not fully replace. Civilian life absorbed a real share of that pressure alongside the military supply chain it was tangled up with. Rationing measures spread as fuel simply became unavailable at ordinary filling stations for anyone outside government or emergency services. Long lines formed at whatever station still had anything to sell, drivers waiting hours for a fraction of what a normal fill-up would have provided a few months earlier. Travel restrictions followed, imposed by occupation authorities trying to manage a shortage they had no quick way to actually fix. And for a population already living under years of occupation, the war that had mostly played out somewhere else suddenly became something showing up directly in how long it took to get anywhere, or whether getting there was possible at all. It is worth being clear about what that overlap actually means, because it is easy to describe a supply line as purely a military target and lose sight of who else depends on the same rails and roads. A railway carrying fuel for Russian armored units is, on the same tracks, often carrying goods and passengers with nothing to do with the war at all. Cutting that line does not distinguish neatly between military cargo and civilian necessity, and the rationing, the fuel lines, the restricted travel that followed this operation landed on ordinary residents of the peninsula just as much as it landed on the units this strike had actually been aimed at. That is not incidental to how this kind of logistics campaign works. It is close to the entire point, because a military supply network under enough civilian visible strain becomes a political problem for the occupying authority, not just a tactical one. None of what happened here required expensive weapons or a large conventional force. The entire operation, from the 50-hour surveillance effort through both drone strikes, ran on tools that individually cost a small fraction of what a single cruise missile or guided bomb typically runs. And the total bill for everything involved likely came in well under what a single advanced interceptor missile cost on its own. What that spending bought was disproportionate in exactly the way modern drone warfare keeps proving it can be. Weeks of disrupted military logistics across an entire peninsula, millions of dollars in destroyed cargo and infrastructure, and a supply network forced onto roads that were already, independently, under sustained attack. That is the pattern sitting underneath this entire operation, and it says something about where this kind of warfare is heading well beyond Crimea specifically. Hitting frontline troops directly has always been costly, contested, and only ever produces localized, temporary effects. A unit destroyed today gets replaced next week. Hitting the logistics that every unit ultimately depends on, the trains, the bridges, the fuel, produces damage that does not simply reset itself the following week, because rebuilding a bridge or replacing a burned fuel shipment takes real time regardless of how badly either side wants it fixed faster. 50 hours of patient surveillance and 2 relatively inexpensive drone strikes did more lasting damage to Russia's ability to supply its forces in Crimea than a considerably larger, more expensive operation against the troops those supplies were meant to reach would likely have managed. The economics behind that comparison are not subtle. A single fuel train and the cargo behind it likely represented an investment in fuel alone worth many times what the drones used to destroy it cost combined. The bridge, once its replacement cost, the engineering time, and the extended period of reduced logistics capacity are all added together, represents a loss on a completely different scale again, the kind of number that does not show up in any single day's headlines but accumulates, week after week, into a real strategic cost for a military that was already stretched thin trying to supply multiple fronts at once. Meanwhile, everything Ukraine spent to inflict that damage, the surveillance effort aside, came down to a handful of cheap airframes that were never expected to survive the mission in the first place. Every rail line, every bridge, every fuel depot Russia still depends on to keep this peninsula supplied is sitting behind the same quiet vulnerability this operation exposed. A network built for efficiency under normal conditions, forced onto predictable, fixed routes the moment its safer options got taken away, and watched, patiently, by people willing to spend 50 hours doing nothing but waiting for exactly the right moment to act. What do you think? Is Crimea's supply network already broken beyond repair, or can Russia still find a way to hold it together? Let us know in the comments below.